Barakatah Yahweh, Barakatah Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Barakaha Kodash, Barakatum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai. Double honors to the apostles and elders, a great millstone who ruled and teach well, and peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. This is the brother Ra'aya with another video, and I'm going to start it off in Joel chapter 2 verse 20. But I will remove far off from you the northern army, which is speaking of the North American army, the United States military, all branches, from the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, the Marines, etc., etc., and will drive him into a land barren and desolate, speaking of the Middle East, more specifically Saudi Arabia, which is going to be the main staging ground for this upcoming World War III, the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the War of Armageddon, in Joel chapter 3, with his face toward the East Sea and his hinder part toward the utmost sea. And when we go to a map of the Middle East, you see you've got Saudi Arabia right here, and it said with his face towards the East Sea. And what do you have to the east? The Persian Gulf. And what's above the Persian Gulf? Iran, the main target of the United States of America and the state of Israel in that Middle Eastern region. And to the northeast, you've got the Tigris and Euphrates River. And you happen to have U.S. military personnel in Iraq, Syria, and Saudi Arabia right now. And where it said, and his hindermost part toward the utmost sea, or behind him, you've got the Red Sea. And his stink shall come up, and his ill savor shall come up, because he had done great things. And to the U.S. military personnel, as well as to all you other heathen nations as militaries that get gathered down into that barren and desolate land, that Middle Eastern region for the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, it's going to be a great slaughter, mass death, and destruction. And if you find yourself there during this upcoming World War III, you better come to terms with that being your final resting place. And I opened up this video with Joel chapter 2 to preface a video on YON's YouTube channel titled United States Pulls Missile Defense System from Saudi Arabia. And while you may see news like this, or the U.S. talking about pulling out troops or reducing troop numbers or moving troop numbers around in these different Middle Eastern countries, the U.S. will not completely leave from that Middle Eastern region. It's biblical prophecy for that northern army to be removed off there to take place in the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Let's get into a little bit of this clip.
Moving on now, the United States has removed its most advanced missile defense system and Patriot missile batteries from Saudi Arabia. This even as the kingdom faces continued air attacks from Yemen's Houthi rebels and threats from Iran. The withdrawal of the U.S. defense system from Prince Sultan Air Base outside of the Riyadh Air Base came as America's Gulf Arab allies nervously watched the chaotic withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, including their last-minute evacuations from Kabul's besieged international airport.
And remember, whenever the United States went to war against a Middle Eastern country during the first Gulf War or the second Gulf War, the war in Iraq, Saudi Arabia was always the main staging ground beforehand.
Resolution Planet Lab satellite picture taken on Friday showed the batteries pads at the airbase empty with no visible activity. Earlier, just southwest of the airbase's runway in a 1 square kilometer area, American forces had stationed Patriot missile batteries as well as one advanced terminal high altitude air defense unit that can destroy ballistic missiles at a higher altitude. Now, questions arise, why has the US pulled out its weapon system from Saudi Arabia at such a sensitive time? And has the US shifted its focus from the Gulf to Asia now? The US move isn't unexpected. Earlier this year, the Pentagon had said that certain air defense systems may be pulled out from the Middle East, not just air defense, just defense systems. Gulf Arab nations worry about America's future plans as its military perceives a growing threat in Asia that requires those systems. Now, a redeployment of the missiles had been rumored for months, in part due to a desire to face what American officials see as the looming great powers conflict with China and Russia.
And there will be another great powers conflict that third woe in Revelation 9 verse 12, World War III, and the United States of America, China and Russia will all be involved, but the main place of conflict isn't going to be in the South China Sea. It's going to be in that Middle Eastern region, that land barren and desolate, for the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the War of Armageddon.
The United States claims that it hasn't abandoned its Gulf allies. Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby said, and I'm quoting here, "The Defense Department continues to maintain tens of thousands of forces and a robust force posture in the Middle East, representing some of our most advanced air power and maritime capabilities in support of U.S. national interests and our regional partnerships." While tens of thousands of American forces remain across the Arabian Peninsula as a counterweight to Iran, tensions remain high in the region as negotiations appear stalled in Vienna over Iran's collapsed nuclear deal with world powers, raising the danger of future confrontations in the region over Iran's nuclear ambitions. Moreover, the rise of Taliban.
And there will be future and the final conflict in that Middle Eastern region. Again, the War of Armageddon, the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, which the Northern Army, the North American Army, the United States military will be moved off into. Like I said earlier, it doesn't matter if you hear about U.S. troop numbers getting reduced, the U.S. talking about completely pulling their forces out or moving troop numbers around. The United States military is there to stay in that Middle Eastern region for the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. And this is all through the will of Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai to punish you heathen nations for afflicting the apple of his eye, the true children of Israel, who are the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. And at the top of that list are you Edomites, or so-called white people. Now let's get into some precepts. This is Joel chapter 3. I'm going to start at verse 1. Salakia. Froze up a little bit. This is Joel chapter 3, verse 1. And the header of this chapter reads, "The nations, the heathen nations, will be judged. For behold, in those days and in that time," and we're living in these days and times right now, the last seconds of these last days, the last seconds of the rulership of the heathen nations, chiefly of the Edomites, before Yahweh Shai HaMashiach, whom the world ignorantly refers to as so-called Jesus Christ, makes his second coming and puts an end to you heathen nations' rulership and saves his elect. And then the kingdom of heaven, where the children of Israel will rule for eternity, will be established. When I shall bring again the captivity of Judah, or the southern kingdom, so-called Negroes, your so-called blacks, African Americans, Jamaicans, Haitians, West Indies, you name it, and Jerusalem, the northern kingdom, the so-called Latinos and Native Americans, the elect from all 12 tribes waking up and coming back to their power, Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai. Verse 2, I will also gather all nations, you heathen nations, and will bring them down into the Valley of Jehoshaphat, which in the Hebrew is Yahweh Shaphat, or Yahweh's judgment, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. Like I just said, this is all the judgment of Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai on you heathen nations, chiefly you Edomites, for afflicting the apple of his eye, the children of Israel, who are again the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. And we can clearly see that you heathens, beginning with you Edomites, scattered his heritage Israel among the nations. You European Edomites, with the help from those Hamites, or so-called Africans, and those Ishmaelites, or so-called Arabs, went to the west coasts of Africa and brought the southern kingdom from the west coast of Africa to the Americas. And then in the Americas, you afflicted the northern kingdom, you European Edomites, during colonization, and enslaved them, stole their lands, and even sent them off to different nations across the planet. A major port for the northern kingdom was in Seville, Spain, and parted my land. And we can clearly see that the land of Israel has been parted among you heathen nations, you Amalekite Edomites, you 1948ers, as we'll call you, and those so-called Palestinian Arabs, again, the biblical Ishmaelites. Neither of you squatters belong there. And you haven't just afflicted the children of Israel in the past, but it goes all the way up until today. From colonization to slavery to the Reconstruction era. Then you had the atrocities of Black Wall Street and Rosewood, the Civil Rights era, the war on drugs. And what do you see now? You Edomites putting Planned Parenthoods into our neighborhoods to advocate for our women to get abortions. You put poisonous food and water into our communities for us to eat and drink. And you push these destructive and chaotic ideologies onto our people, like hip hop culture, rap culture, thug culture, being black, Latino, Native American, anything else under the sun to take us away from our power. You Edomites, chiefly, as well as you other heathen nations, got a lot to pay for. And even then, you Edomites still need to pay for the Grecian and the Roman captivities. But now, I'm going to jump down to verse 9. Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, which is exactly what the true men of the Lord, the prophets of the Most High, chiefly through GMS or Great Millstone, are doing by going out onto the highways and byways preaching this word, as well as putting up video epistles like this, proclaiming among you heathen Gentiles to prepare for war, World War III, war with Iran, war with Russia, war with China, in regards to the Northern Army of the United States of America, the War of Armageddon, the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Wake up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. Assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen. You Edomites, so-called white people, Moabites of the so-called Chinese, the Hamites of the so-called Africans, the Ishmaelites of the so-called Arabs, the Elamites of the so-called East Indians, etc., etc., and gather yourselves together round about. Thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Yahweh. And those mighty ones are the death angels of the Most High, holding back this great destruction, waiting to get the go-ahead to release it, which is going to happen after the MOTB, the Charagma, the MICROCHIPIMPLANT, is mandatorily implemented. Verse 12, let the heathen be wakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, Yahweh's Shaphat, or Yahweh's judgment, for there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about, because you've afflicted the apple of the Most High's eye, the children of Israel. Put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come get you down, for the press is full. The fats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of Yahweh is near in the valley of decision. And if you got that spiritual eye salve, you can clearly see that the day of Yahweh is very near in the valley of decision. And during this battle in the valley of Jehoshaphat, when all these different heathen nations as militaries are fighting each other, Yahweh Shai Hamashiach, who again the world ignorantly refers to as so-called Jesus Christ, is going to make his second coming, and it's going to be in the valley of Jehoshaphat, as well as over in the United States of America, because Yahweh Shai is going to return in that massive fathership chariot that Esdras couldn't see the end of in 2nd Esdras 13, and he's going to wipe the floor with you heathen nations in the valley of Jehoshaphat. This is 2nd Esdras chapter 13. I'm going to start at verse 5. And after this I beheld, and lo, there were gathered together a multitude of men, multitudes in the valley of decision, out of number, from the four winds of heaven, or from the four corners of the earth, these heathen nations as militaries, from the United States of America, Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the state of Israel, Iran, Germany, France, Britain, these other NATO nations, etc., etc., to subdue the man that came out of the sea, referring to Yahweh Shai Hamashiach. But I beheld, and lo, he had graved himself a great mountain, and flew up upon it, that massive fathership chariot that Yahweh Shai is returning in. And the chariots are what people ignorantly refer to as so-called UFOs. And over these past couple of years, there's been such an uptick in chariot sightings all across the planet that these heathen nations as governments have had to admit to their existence. We definitely are in those times where the day of Yahweh in the Valley of Decision is very near. But I would have seen the region or place whereout the hill was graven, and I could not. That's how massive that chariot was. Esdras couldn't see the end of it. So it makes sense that, hey, the chariot would be seen over the United States of America, which is biblically known as Babylon the Great, as well as over in that Middle Eastern region during the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. And after this I beheld, and lo, all they which were gathered together to subdue him were sore afraid, and yet durst fight. When Yahushua makes his second coming during the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, these heathen nations are going to stop fighting each other and band together to try to fight against Yahushua. And lo, as he saw the violence of the multitude that came, he neither lifted up sword, he neither lifted up his hand, nor held sword, nor any instrument of war, but only I saw that he sent out of his mouth, as it had been, a blast of fire, and out of his lips a flaming breath, and out of his tongue he cast out sparks and tempests. That concentrated heat, or so-called laser beams being shot from the chariot. Verse 11, and they were all mixed together, the blast of fire, the flaming breath, and the great tempest, and fell with violence upon the multitude which was prepared to fight, and burned them up, every one. Soldiers, Humvees, fighter jets, artillery pieces, tanks, etc., etc. Hey, and even these heathen nations of space forces that they're going to try to fight against Yahushua and the heavenly host with, it's going to be no competition, a first round knockout. You heathen nations as puny, tinker toy weapons that you have right now won't even stand a chance against the heavenly, far advanced supernatural technology of Yahweh Bahashem Yahushua and the heavenly host. So that upon a sudden of an innumerable multitude, nothing was to be perceived but only dust and smell of smoke. Everything just getting burned up by that concentrated heat. When I saw this, I was afraid. That's it with this video. And with this video, I hope you sincere Akim were edified. As you can clearly see, we're in those times. So now more than ever, you should have all 10 toes down in this truth, pushing this word as hard as you possibly can to make your calling and election sure, and be safe from these coming calamities of Jacob's trouble, and be on that chariot with Yahushua, watching him just completely wipe the floor with these heathen nations. So again, with this video, I hope you sincere Akim were edified. And as always, I'm going to say Abad Babal, Kwam Yasharala, and until next time, Shalom.